Great, good morning, everyone. My name is Olivera Jovanovic. I'm the director of the LLM and Master's programs at University of San Francisco. We're excited to welcome you today as we talk about international law and human rights at the University of San Francisco. We are very lucky to have two wonderful presenters here today. First, we have Professor Connie de la Vega. Professor de la Vega is the Marshall P. Madison Professor, a Dean Circle Scholar, and the Academic Director of our international programs here at University of San Francisco. Her specialty is international human rights law, and last year she published the Guide to International Human Rights Procedure. She's also the co-author of other publications, including The American Legal System for Foreign Lawyers and International Human Rights Law, an Introduction. Among her many recognitions is that in 2016, sorry, not enough coffee in my system today, she was named the Warren M. Christopher International Lawyer of the Year by the State Bar of California International Law Section. So thank you, Professor de la Vega, for spending your valuable time with us here today.
Thank you, and hi, everybody.
Also, we have joining us Julianne Cartwright Traylor. She's our Associate Director of the International LLM and Visiting Scholar and Semester Exchange programs. Julianne has also spent her career in international human rights law and gender and development issues. Prior to joining USF, she had a career with where she was involved with several international organizations, and to name a few, she's had roles as an international visiting scholar at the International Peace Research Institute in Oslo. She's acted as a non-governmental representative on the Human Rights Commission issues before the United Nations, and she's also served as chair of the board of directors of Amnesty International here in the US. So we have two very well-accomplished women in this field, and we're excited to talk to you a little bit about our programs at USF. So with that, I will turn it over and turn off my video so that you can have these two wonderful women fully in the spotlight today. So thank you both. And Julianne, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the topics that we'll cover today.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. We're happy to have you join us with our webinar today. The way we're going to structure our presentation, we're going to start out talking about international law coursework at the University of San Francisco School of Law. I'll give you an introduction and an overview of some of the wonderful varied classes that we have here at the law school. And then I'm going to ask Professor de la Vega to talk about one of the specific classes that we have for our international LLM students called American Legal Rights class. And then I'll add a little bit about the American Legal Writing and American Legal Systems class after that. And then we're going to talk about our very unique Frank C. Newman International Human Rights Law Clinic that Professor de la Vega is the founding director and academic director, and she is the one who is in charge of the clinic. So and then we're going to leave enough time at the end to answer your questions, your comments, and then we will conclude. So we have a full program, but what I'd like to do is to start out, we have a varied array of international law courses for our LLM and JD students here at US, given by renowned scholars, practitioners, and professors. And just a quick sample, we have comparative law with Professor Dana Zartner. And in that class, she talks about the differences between common law countries and civil law countries. She talks about different legal systems and the students. For example, we had an LLM student in the class this year who talked about Brazil and would make comparisons with the legal system. A number of our students also take international business transactions with Professor Reza Debarge. And as the title talks about international negotiations, international transactions, international disputes and dispute resolution. So we do that, and many of our LLM students take that class. We also have a class in public and international law by Professor Jack Garvey, and he talks about lawyers operating in the international legal arena, what types of institutions they work under, how governments work in the international arena. We also, in the past, and from time to time, we've offered classes like international refugee law. We've also had classes in Chinese business law, in EU law, and those last two classes we have because we have renowned scholars coming from our partner schools in Europe, Charles University and East China University of Political Science and Law in Shanghai, and they come here and they teach classes. And we also have international visiting scholars, Fulbright scholars who come, who give lectures. And so this gives you, and we have like international dispute resolution classes. So we have a number of classes that you might be interested in taking. And we're very proud that we got by Pre-Law Magazine an A- ranking for our international law classes. But what I want to do right now is, those are the classes that the LLM students take with JD students here at the law school. But we have one class, a series of classes in particular for our foreign trained LLM students. And I'm going to turn it over to Professor De La Vega to talk about the American legal system class. And so she'll talk about that class, and she's going to be talking about what opportunities we give our students to see US law in practice. Professor De La Vega, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Julianne, and hi, everybody again. I do teach the American Legal Systems class in the fall, as part of the class, I cover a wide variety of topics dealing with US law, in particular constitutional law, and how the federal law relates to the state's law. But what I'm going to cover right now is the practical part of the class, which is allowing or giving you an experience to see the practice of law as it happens. And we do that through 3 court visits over the course of the year. The first court visit is to see the California Supreme Court. And I will say that one of the things, in order to make this all be more relevant, is that we do have someone who comes and talks to you about the cases that you're going to be watching during oral arguments, so that they make some sense. But then you will actually see the cases being argued before the court, and you get to see both sides present their case, and the justices, of course, asking questions throughout the proceedings. So that's the California Supreme Court. We also, in the fall semester, go to see the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal, which is part of the federal system. It's the appellate court for the federal courts in the Western region. And again, that is, again, also oral argument. There would be 3 justices there. And again, you get to see both sides presenting their case, and the 3 justices asking questions to the attorneys. The court often stays afterwards. One of the justices will stay afterwards and talk to you and answer your questions, not about the cases, but about the whole way the system works. So that's another trip in the fall. During the spring semester, we go see a jury trial. Jury trials last a long time, so you actually only get to see one part of a jury trial that takes we'll go for 3 hours. So usually that's enough to see something like voir dire, which is how the jury is selected, or you might get to see one of the 2 sides presenting their witnesses, or you might get to see closing arguments being made by the attorneys in the case. So again, part of that is because it's always a long procedure, we only get to see a little snippet of it. but you will have, again, an overview of the case before we get there. The other thing that we do is, it's not exactly what people are used to, but I think our students really appreciate doing this. And in order to give you a view of how the criminal justice system works in the United States, and in particular California, we go visit the state prison at San Quentin. San Quentin is a town that's about a 45-minute drive from San Francisco. And we are given a tour of the prison by one of the prisoners, which our students always find amazing. But the prisoners always know the prison better than we do, than anybody else does. So they part of their rehabilitation is getting to the point where they can then meet with people on the outside and talk to them about what goes on in the prison. So we get a whole tour of the prison, again, you get to ask questions throughout that whole tour, which takes about 3 hours. I assume I should now go into the human rights clinic.
Before that, so thank you for that quick overview, Connie, of the American legal system class. And I wanted to add some things. We are so fortunate that we are here in San Francisco, that we are able to take our international students, our LLM students, to two of the most important courts in the whole US legal system. They meet in different locations throughout the year, but one of their locations is here in San Francisco. So we're very fortunate to be located here so that we can take our students to see them. The second part of the series of classes that we have for our LLM students, the class is called, and it's in the spring semester, it's the American Legal Writing and American Legal System 2. And it's an extension of the class that Professor de la Vega teaches, that Connie teaches. And in the spring, we have one of our expert legal writing professors, Professor Mona Lisa Vu, teach that class. And as the class is named, we emphasize American legal writing in that class. And students in the class get to really have experience and get practice into, for example, executing documents and learning how to write as if they had a US client, whether they be back, the students be working as a lawyer back in their home countries or here in the US. They get that experience and that practice, so that after their LLM degrees, they're able to use that. And all of these classes are really for skills building and oral advocacy in terms of legal analysis, critical analysis. So that's the American Legal System 1 class that Connie just spoke about, and the American Legal Writing and American Legal System 2 class. Those are our two classes specifically for our LLM students here at our law school. And now let's transition. If you notice, I didn't mention when I talked about the classes, the international law classes, I did not mention international human rights law. And so Professor de la Vega is going to talk about that as a background to talking about our very unique and well-known international Frank C. Newman International Human Rights Law Clinic, and she may tell you the reason it's named after him. She's going to provide a general overview of the clinic, what the structure of the clinic is, what the students actually do in the clinic, and what do the students do at the United Nations. So, Connie, proceed.
Okay. So as Julianne said, I'm just going to briefly talk about the International Human Rights Law class, which is given in the fall semester. which I teach in the fall semester, and that you have to take that class if you want to apply for the Human Rights Clinic, which is in the spring. The human rights class goes over various aspects of human rights law around around the world. It covers makes a combination of some substantive law with procedural law, and we cover the United Nations procedures, but also the regional bodies that have their own procedures as well. So that class is a prerequisite for the spring Human Rights Clinic class. The Human Rights Clinic class you have to apply for in the fall semester, and then if you are admitted into the class, you actually have to do some work over the break, the December break, because we have to be ready to go when we get back to school in January. And that's when you take the clinic, and there's classes that teach various procedural parts of advocacy at the United Nations, including how to make oral statements, how to talk to delegates. We actually practice talking to delegates. And the work that the students do includes not only, as I mentioned, the research, so that you know you're a particular expert in a particular subject. But once we get back to classes in January, you have to prepare a written statement that becomes part of the record for the Human Rights Council and the Commission on the Status of Women. The Human Rights Council meets in Geneva, the Commission on the Status of Women meets in New York, and LLM students have participated in both of those locations. So there's an official written statement, and then after that's filed in early February, you also have to prepare a 15-page paper, which I believe helps you feel like you're an expert in your particular issue that you're working on. So that's why I have you do that. Once you're at the meetings at both the Human Rights Council and the Commission on the Status of Women, you actually get to attend, and I will note that the Human Rights Council is much more open to NGO participation. We actually get to participate in everything, including being in the meeting room. We can go into the meeting room like all the other delegates do. There is this place for us to sit, but it's all very much woven into the whole system. Some of the students, not all, get to make an oral statement. So just as government delegates get to make statements before the whole council, there's an opportunity for NGOs to make statements, and human rights advocates always makes at least one statement, sometimes more. Then the important thing as a lawyer is that we get to participate in drafting meetings of resolutions. So it's sort of like the law being drafted by legislatures, and NGOs are allowed to attend the drafting meetings and can make suggestions both at the meetings for language in the resolution, or can talk to delegates to try to get them to make the same suggestions. Always more likely to have some language go in from a delegate than from a government delegate than an NGO, but we are fairly successful in getting language into those resolutions. So I think that is an overview of the work that the students do in the clinic in the spring semester. And again, you have to take the human rights class in the fall semester to be able to participate in the clinic.
And Connie and I have a long history, and we started out with our mentor, who is Frank C. Newman, and a world-renowned expert in international human rights law. And so we did this some decades ago, but that's why we're very happy that we can provide this experience for our students. Now, one thing that Connie mentioned is the organization Human Rights Advocates. And we started that non-governmental organization when we were students, um, uh, law students, political science students. And that organization has consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. So we accredit our law students, our JD and LLM students, when they go to these meetings in New York City and in Geneva, they are official non-governmental organization delegates to these meetings under the auspices of human rights advocates. And if any of you is interested in actually seeing the students make speeches, we can send you the links to show where they are making their speeches. And so this is, they're not, a number of schools may take their students to meetings in New York or what have you, but we're actually participating. We're not only observing, we're actually participating in those meetings. And that makes us really unique. And some of Professor De La Vega's students who were in the clinic have gone on to work for the UN. Now, remember, we had an LLM student from El Salvador who's now working for the UN Development Program. And Connie, you can tell them about the two who were in Geneva. Why don't you tell them?
Okay. Well, we actually just got to meet both of them. We have one of our former students from the Human Rights Clinic is the assistant to the president of the Human Rights Council. So she's in a pretty high position at the UN and doing all the work that sort of helps get the meetings going and moving forward. Our other student is working as an assistant to the Special Rapporteur on Myanmar. And so she is helping that particular mandate holder do research and prepare reports on human rights issues in Myanmar.
Right. We just got the email that she has another upgraded official title now. It's a long title, the legal officer in the UN's International and Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. And that was created by the Human Rights Council. So it's very exciting for us to see students who have participated in Professor De La Vega's clinic over the years to actually get jobs and assume positions in these international organizations, such as in New York or Geneva, or in home countries like in El Salvador, the UNDP office. So I'm just looking right now at the time. I wanted to let you know that we are still accepting applications for admission to our LLM program that begins in August. So if you're interested or know any of your colleagues who may be interested, to contact her. And as you see on the screen right now, where you can, if you have any questions about anything that we have said, you can contact me at either that email address or the telephone number, and we'll get back to you. We're currently doing Zoom meetings and Skype meetings with applicants, so it's still open, and as we say, we still have merit scholarships available. So on that note, does anybody have a question for us? We have some time for a Q&A.
I have one question, Julianne, that students ask quite often, that maybe you and Connie can speak to, it's in regard to the Human Rights Clinic and how the clinic goes about choosing the issues that they're going to advocate and on that year, or research and present on. And maybe if you guys could give some examples of what they have focused on in the past.
Okay, well, let me answer that question since I have to deal with it. Basically, the Human Rights Council meets 3 times a year, and our issues are going to be focused on the issues covered in the March meeting when we attend. Occasionally, we do cover something that happens at a later session. For example, one student was very interested in the death penalty, and so they prepared a submission, and there was a panel on that particular issue, even though it wasn't being covered at that session. But generally, we try to focus on what's being covered at the March session so that they can both prepare reports that become part of the official record of the council, as well as work on the resolutions, which is the critical thing. So that goes to your question about how we choose the topics. You had a second question, which I'm sorry, but my phone's ringing. It got me sidetracked. What was the second question, Olivia?
What are some of the topics?
Yes, what are some of the topics that they've worked on?
Oh, okay. So some of the topics that come up in the March session include the right to housing, and I'm trying to think of what else we just covered, and it's not basically the Human Rights Council has now gotten into making specific resolutions that say we're going to talk about this particular issue this coming session. So whereas we used to have a pretty broad spectrum, we're now sort of bound by what the Human Rights Council says they're going to cover. And I know what I forgot to say. The CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women, actually decides the year before the session what they're going to cover the following year. So our written statement, which we submit in October, will focus on that particular issue, and then the students that go to the Commission on the Status of Women will focus on aspects of the issue that the Commission on the Status of Women selects. Other issues, for example, this last year, we worked on counterterrorism, the human rights issues around counterterrorism, which basically focuses on not violating people's rights when countries are trying to deal with counterterrorism issues. We also, I'm trying to think of what other issues we have.
Information privacy.
Yeah, privacy. Actually, we helped introduce the whole issue of the right to privacy to the Human Rights Council. So it's the right to privacy, and one session was on information privacy. So again, focusing on how efforts to deal with various issues that governments deal with, that make sure that they do not violate the right to privacy of individuals. I think, did I mention the right to food? Right to food is another.
No, yes, yeah.
In fact, that was our LLM student worked
Yes.
on the right to food this year, and he focused on the fishery workers' rights in the context of the right to food, which is actually now has a big book that's come out on that particular issue. But so we've prepared various reports, and if any of you are interested in looking at the work that we do, you can go to our website, which is humanrightsadvocates.org, and look. All the reports are posted on that website, so you can see what kind of issues we work on.
And Connie, all of these documents that are submitted to the UN, they are official documents. And
not all of them, but the short statements, the written statements that we prepare.
Yeah, and the students get to put those on their resumes and get to put their official document number on them, because they work very hard on their long paper and on their short papers. So that's another benefit of being in the clinic. And this year, for example, is the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women that was held in Beijing. And so there are all sorts of celebrations this year, and that's one of the topics, the ongoing topics for this past year and this coming year at the Commission on the Status of Women. And which reminds me, Connie, of one of our LLM graduates, a lawyer from Uganda, has been helping us supervise our students in New York City. She now works for legal aid, but she has progressed from getting her LLM degree here at USF and is doing work in New York City. So I think that this gives you an idea of some of the topics that Professor De La Vega Connie has worked on with her students. Next question.
Sorry, there's a little delay in unmuting my audio. So there is just a question kind of about the structure or the size of the clinic. And I think what it's getting at is if you can talk a little bit more about, I do know it's a small clinic and kind of the intimate experience that students get in moving through from the class through the clinic.
Sure. So the clinic can take up to 8 students, and because we do not want to impact on JD students, the LLM students are usually added on top of that. So the maximum number of students we would have in that class is 10. So the class size ranges from 6 to 10 students. And again, that means that part of it is that you have to work very closely with me and actually also with the Human Rights Advocates Board, because each of the board members is overseeing what Human Rights Advocates is going to be presenting to the Human Rights Council and the Commission on the Status of Women. So there is a lot of contact both with me as well as with some of the board members on HRA, Human Rights Advocates.
Wonderful, wonderful. I know you mentioned a little bit about the paper and the kind of the amount of research that students do so that they're prepared to really know their topic area very, very well. Can you talk a little bit more about how the students are guided and assisted in that as they move forward?
Sure. So the first thing is doing the research, as I mentioned, and that includes 2 parts of doing research. One is doing the legal research on the international standards and sometimes country standards on a particular topic, and then finding out what the Human Rights Council or the Commission on Status of Women are doing on a particular topic. So we have a class right before finals in December where the students are given instruction by our law librarians on how to do research, because over the break, the students end up having to do the bulk, well, not the bulk, but a lot of their research so they can then be prepared to write their reports at the starting in the beginning of January. So they do get instruction not only from me, but also from our librarians on how to get sources for their reports. And again, sources both on the facts, which involves looking at what countries do, and the legal standards, which is both the UN standards and what other countries do. Because sometimes we're trying to develop a standard at the UN that some countries might do and some don't, and so we often use examples from countries to show that yes, this is a valid standard, and countries should all be agreeing to do this kind of protection of human rights.
Wonderful. I guess there was one question a little bit, Connie, I gave a little bit of introduction on your background, but the question was more about you and your expertise. And is there anything that I omitted that you'd like to share? Because I realized I didn't give you a chance to fully introduce yourself. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry. Well, I think between all of us, we've sort of mentioned this. I grew up in Mexico, so when I came to the United States to go to college, I sort of already had an international perspective on things. And I studied international relations undergraduate, and then I went to law school. And what really drew me to my classes was I was very lucky to have to be able to select a class that I wanted for myself my second semester first year. And so I took international human rights law with Professor Frank Newman, who had a long history of working at the UN and then also became a California Supreme Court justice. And so he made it feasible for me to go to Geneva between my first and second year of law school. And so I got to actually see some of the procedures working at the UN. And I realized that it would have been much more helpful if I had had more instruction on how all this works. So that eventually led to me, having the class in the clinic and introducing the students to how to do these reports and also how to participate at the meetings, and then ultimately to the book that I wrote on how to do all this, all these various levels of advocacy at both the UN and regional bodies. I think I answered all your questions over there.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. And and to that point, you've written and about teaching American legal systems. You've taught the class for many years. As we have prospective LLM students who are all going to enroll at USF, obviously, but as we have them in the audience today, what would you suggest that they do to help prepare for success in any LLM program, hopefully ours?
Well, basically, LLM programs' first focus is to make sure that the students understand the law in the United States, and part of the American legal systems class is aimed at facilitating the students making the transition from their legal systems to ours. The majority of people come from countries where civil law is the standard for the practice of law, whereas we use the common law here in the United States, and there are a few countries that do use the common law. So I have to make the transition and explain how the common law works so that they can understand their classes better. And in fact, that's part of why we go to see the courts in action, is to see how the law gets made in the United States. The lawyers are making their arguments, and the judges will consider those arguments in deciding how to basically make the law. And that doesn't mean that we don't have legislation, but it does mean that there's a different way. There's also an additional way that law is made in this country. Again, I think I answered your question on that one.
No, you did. You did, absolutely. Julianne, you've been advising students. So a similar question, you've been advising almost thousands of prospective LLM students throughout your career, your very short career because you're very young. But you've had a robust career, and we work very hard to help students transition as they come into orientation. And I know this year, one of the things that you've put together is a virtual pre-orientation to help them kind of prepare even earlier, that our admits will soon take part in. But I guess my question for you is very similar. It's throughout the years and throughout your experience, what do you see as something that these students should consider today or think about as they start to enter LLM programs to be successful?
Well, one thing is to have a passion for the law, and just when I read the applications and the personal statements from our applicants to our LLM program, generally there's a story there about something that they witnessed, something that happened to them, a family member, or just the general, for example, human rights situation in their home countries, and they want to do something to remedy those situations and deal with those violations. So with that, our students are so well prepared. They are like three, depending on which countries they're from, they have 3 years of undergraduate law school, some 5 years. A number of them have done internships, they've done research. A number of them have done what we call moot court or model UN in their home countries. So this type of preparation, I am in awe because I'm not a linguist, but I'm in awe of the skills, the linguistic skills that our students have. Some 2, 3 And one year we had someone with 5 languages, but that was sort of cheating because she was from Switzerland. And you know about the official languages there. But so just preparation with the language skills, with their background, with an open mind to come here to learn about the as Connie said, the common law system, to the LLM students, whatever country they're from and whatever their background, bring so much, they add so much to the culture of our law school classes with their knowledge and their information and their experiences from home. They learn from us, but we learn from them. The professors learn from them, their classmates learn, and it's really a collaborative relationship that the students have in the class. So those are some of the things: language background, specific background. Some of the students who come here know specifically what they want to do. They have been working in law firms back in their home countries or been working in organizations, and so they come here to work on those skills, improve those skills, so that if they either stay here in the US or if they go back to their home countries, they have learned so much, and they have an additional degree that they can add to their resumes. And so what we have been doing this year, we have been working on what we call learning modules. And for our admitted students and for the students who will be coming or who will be enrolling in our program, they'll be able to do a number of activities and things before they come here, so that as we say, we can hit the ground running with their studies in the American legal system class and then their other classes that they're taking.
If I can just add something, during orientation week, we actually have 4 days of training for the students so that they learn right away how dealing with research issues, dealing with some overall thematic issues, and so that when they start the classes the following week, they are at least have a foundation to build on.
Yes, and I think that's a huge advantage that we provide our students, and it's something unique that I've seen us do here at USF. Well, ladies, I think we've answered most of the questions, but we have about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to see if either one of you wanted to leave any final thoughts, if there's anything that we hadn't covered that you'd like the students to know about our coursework or about the clinic or just about the programs in general.
Well, the LLM students at the law school, we see as an integral part of our law school. And one thing that I didn't mention, we have a very vibrant international law society. And the LLMs work very closely with them. And each year we have a panel discussion featuring 3 or 4 LLM students, and the JD students really appreciate and enjoy that particular session with the students. We also provide them with counseling through our Office of Career Services, just like we do for our JD students. The LLM students can take advantage of that and working with them in terms of doing their resumes, job searches, interviewing skills. And we have a number of networking activities throughout the academic year that the LLM students can participate in. We also have a very vibrant International Student and Scholar Services office here on campus, and they work very closely with our LLM students to deal with those types of issues. And some of the students who do come want to stay an additional year, So they help them with what you call optional practical training, that they run an in-service class for them, and then the students apply through them to get a one-year extension on their visas to and they get work permits to work in jobs here in the U.S. So the main thing we want to say is that there's a whole package in terms of what we provide for the students, both in on our LLM team, at the law school, and at the University of San Francisco as a whole, to not only provide the students with a strong academic background, but also a strong background in experiential learning, like the example Connie has talked about, the clinic, and also to help them enjoy the cultural experiences of being in San Francisco.
And I would just like to add that the LLM students are very involved in being part of the school, and in fact, they will elect a representative that will be part of the student body board. So they have direct representation in what the students themselves do to participate in the law school as a whole.
And that's definitely true. And the students participate in a number of, I think one time I counted there were about 30 plus student organizations at the law school. And that's one thing during orientation week, and the weeks after that, there's an information session so that all of the students, including the LLM students, can find out information, and they can join those organizations and work within those organizations.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, ladies, for both of those statements. And with that, I think we'll wrap up today, unless anyone has any other questions they want to type in the chat box. But I think we've gotten to everything that I've seen or submitted, vote that was submitted to me. So thank you both so much for your time. If anyone has any questions, the contact information for our department is on the screen, as well as Julianne's direct contact information. I will say that we are currently working from home under the shelter-in-place guidelines, so I heartily encourage you to email us so we can set up a Zoom meeting with you. Thank you all very much for your time, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the process. I think the one thing I hear from our students over and over again is that the reason they've come here is because these two women are incredibly responsive and personal and concerned about every individual that comes through the program. And that really is the USF difference. And you are very lucky to have the opportunity to learn from them. And we're lucky to have you as part of our program. So please do feel free to reach out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Vega.